"I can heal you with a prayer." The millionaire laughed. But the truth came out. Sterling Harrison was used to having control over everything in his life, but for the past 2 years, since the accident that left him in a wheelchair, he felt the world had crumbled around him. That day at the door of the Silver Oaks Rehabilitation Center, he didn't expect a simple phrase would completely change the course of his existence. It was when an elderly lady approached his wheelchair. Her clothes were worn, the scarf on her head was faded, and she carried a torn plastic bag. Sterling was leaving another frustrating physical therapy session when the woman whispered softly, "I can heal you with a prayer." Sterling let out a sarcastic laugh and accelerated the wheelchair, trying to get away from that woman. Who did she think she was to approach him like that? He was Sterling Harrison, owner of 3 companies in the region, a man who moved millions every month. And now a beggar was offering him healing through prayers? "Get out of the way, Avan," he shouted, making the chair brush past the woman. The lady didn't move, just smiled sadly and shook her head. Sterling accelerated even more, irritated by that absurd situation. In the driver's seat of his modified SUV, he could still hear that woman's voice in his mind. There was something in her way of speaking that deeply bothered him. 3 days later, Sterling was in the parking lot of his corporate building when he saw the same figure approaching. The lady walked slowly, but with determination. Her clothes were still worn, but she seemed clean and tidy. When she got close to the SUV, she repeated exactly the same words. "I can heal you with a prayer." Sterling felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. How had that woman found out where he worked? And why did she insist on that ridiculous story? He grabbed his phone and called building security. "There's a beggar here in the parking lot bothering me. Come get her out of here now." 2 security guards appeared quickly and approached the woman. She offered no resistance, just waved at Sterling and began to walk away. But before leaving completely, the lady folded a piece of paper and dropped it on the ground right next to the SUV. Sterling watched everything from his office window on the 10th floor. When the security guards went up to file the report, he went down to the parking lot. The paper was still there, swaying in the wind. For some reason he couldn't explain, he picked up the note and opened it. The words written in shaky handwriting made his heart stop. "I know you remember the accident on County Road 42, near the Blue Ridge gas station, on that rainy March day. My husband was in the other car." Sterling felt his hands tremble. How did that woman know such specific details about the accident? Only he, the doctors and the police knew all those facts. The accident had happened on a little traveled road during a storm. Sterling was returning from a meeting when he lost control of the car on a curve. That night, Sterling couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, thinking about the note and the mysterious woman. The next morning he called his assistant, Winston, and ordered him to find out everything about that lady. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. 2 days later, Winston brought a complete report. The woman's name was Gladys Miller. She was 67 years old and worked as a custodian at the city's Metro General Hospital. She was a widow, lived in a simple house in the East Side district, and cared for 2 orphaned grandchildren. More importantly, her husband, Arthur Miller, had indeed been involved in the same accident that left Sterling paraplegic. "Mr. Sterling," said Winston, hesitating a bit, "there's one more thing. Her husband survived the impact but died 3 days later at the hospital from internal complications." Sterling felt the world spin around him. During all these 2 years, he had assumed the other driver died instantly. No one had ever told him the man had survived for a few days. The guilt he already carried intensified 1,000-fold. Did he say anything before passing?" asked Sterling. His voice choked. According to the medical report, he was sedated most of the time, but his wife stayed by his side day and night. Sterling spent the next few days avoiding leaving the house. He cancelled important meetings and locked himself in his room, trying to process that information. His mind wouldn't stop creating scenarios about what could have happened if he had visited the hospital, if he had apologized, if he had helped in some way. A week later, during a routine checkup at the private hospital, where he was being monitored, Sterling saw Gladys cleaning the hallways. She wore a faded blue uniform and pushed a cart with cleaning supplies. When she saw him, she stopped what she was doing and approached slowly. "You read my note," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Sterling nodded, unable to speak. Gladys pulled a plastic chair and sat beside his wheelchair. For the first time, Sterling could see her eyes up close. They were brown, tired, but there was a serenity in them that left him confused. "Why didn't you tell me about your husband the first time?" Sterling finally asked. "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she replied simply. "People in pain need time to open up. You want money, don't you? You want to sue me." Sterling tried to sound harsh, but his voice came out weak. Gladys shook her head slowly. "I don't want any of that. I just want you to know that I forgive you." "What do you mean?" Sterling was genuinely shocked. "I killed your husband. You caused an accident, on a stormy night, on a dangerous road. My Arthur was also driving too fast to get home. It was circumstances, not malice." Sterling felt tears running down his face. It had been so long since he had cried that he had almost forgotten what it was like. "Did he suffer?" he asked, fearing the answer. "The first 2 days he was unconscious. On the last day he woke up for a few hours." Gladys paused as if deciding whether to continue. "He asked about the other driver. He wanted to know if you were okay." Sterling sobbed loudly, unable to control himself. The image of that man worrying about him while dying was more than he could bear. Gladys placed her hand on his shoulder and stayed silent, letting him pour out all the accumulated pain. "Why do you want to heal me?" Sterling asked after he managed to calm down. "I took your husband from you." "Because you are also a victim," said Gladys with a firm voice. "You carry a guilt that is killing you inside. My Arthur wouldn't want that for you." In the following days, Sterling couldn't get Gladys out of his head. He started visiting her at the hospital during her work hours. At first she was suspicious, thinking he was there out of pity or to feel better about himself. "You don't need to do this," she said one day while mopping the hallway floor. "You don't need to keep coming here out of guilt." "It's not guilt," Sterling lied. "It's curiosity. I want to understand how you can forgive me so easily." Gladys stopped mopping the floor and looked directly at him. "Easily?" She laughed humorlessly. "You think it was easy. I spent a whole year angry at you. A year waking up at night, dreaming of the accident, imagining ways to make you pay for what you did." Sterling fell silent, absorbing those words. "What changed?" he finally asked. "My grandchildren," she replied, returning to her cleaning. "They started being afraid of me. I was always angry, always sad. One day my 7-year-old grandson asked if I didn't like him anymore. That's when I realized the anger was turning me into a person I didn't recognize." Gladys explained that she started attending a small church in her neighborhood, not for religion, but because she needed a place to pour her heart out. The pastor was a simple man who helped her understand that holding a grudge was like drinking poison, hoping the other person would die. "But I still feel angry sometimes," she admitted. "The difference is that now, I choose not to let it control me." Sterling began visiting Gladys regularly. She told stories about Arthur, about how they met, about the dreams they had together. Sterling discovered that Arthur was a mechanic who dreamed of opening his own shop. He was returning from the bank on the night of the accident, after being denied a loan. "He talked about you sometimes," Gladys said one day, leaving Sterling surprised. "What do you mean?" "Arthur read the city newspapers. He always commented on the businesses you opened, the jobs you created. He said he wished he could meet you in person to understand how someone could build so much success." The irony of the situation left Sterling devastated. The man he had killed admired him from afar, dreamed of meeting him, and when they finally met, it was in a tragedy that destroyed both families. During one of the visits, Sterling asked if he could meet her grandchildren. Gladys hesitated, but agreed. The children, Abigail and Arthur Caleb, were shy at first, but soon got used to the wheelchair and started asking innocent questions. "Why can't you walk?" asked 7-year-old Arthur Caleb. "Because I got hurt in a car accident," replied Sterling honestly. "Just like our grandpa," said 9-year-old Abigail. "He got hurt in an accident too." Sterling looked at Gladys, who nodded sadly. "Do you remember him?" asked Sterling. "Of course," said Arthur Caleb excitedly. "He always brought lollipops for us, and he could fix anything that broke." The children spoke about their grandfather with such affection that Sterling felt his heart break again. He realized he hadn't just taken a husband from Gladys, but also a loving grandfather from those innocent children. After the children went to play, Gladys served Sterling a simple coffee. "They don't know you were in the other car," she said quietly. "They'll find out eventually." "Maybe, but when they do, they'll see you're a good person who made a mistake." Sterling didn't feel like a good person. He felt like a selfish man who had destroyed a family and was only now trying to make peace with his conscience. "How can you be so strong?" asked Sterling. "I'm not strong," Gladys laughed. "I'm just an old, tired woman who has no choice but to keep living. But you take care of your grandchildren, you work all day, and you still manage to smile. I can barely get out of bed in the morning." Gladys was silent for a long moment, stirring the sugar in her coffee. "You know what the difference is between the two of us, Sterling?" she finally asked. "What?" "You lost the ability to walk, but you still have many things to fight for. I lost the most important person in my life, but I still have 2 children who depend on me. The pain doesn't go away, but responsibility forces us to keep going." Sterling began to understand that Gladys wasn't just a simple woman who had lost her husband. She was a survivor, someone who had faced the worst possible tragedy and found a way to rebuild her life. In the following days, Sterling began to observe Gladys's work at the hospital more closely. She always arrived at 6 in the morning, worked until 3 in the afternoon, and then went to pick up her grandchildren from school. In the evenings, she helped with homework and took care of the house. Sterling had never seen anyone work so hard without complaining. One day, Sterling witnessed Gladys fainting in the hospital corridor. She was cleaning the floor when she simply collapsed. Sterling immediately called for help and insisted she be examined by a doctor. The doctor discovered Gladys had severe anemia, the result of poor nutrition and overwork. She was literally working herself to death to support her grandchildren. "Mrs. Gladys," said the doctor sternly, "you need to take better care of yourself. You cannot keep working at this pace without eating properly." Gladys merely nodded, but Sterling could see in her eyes that she had no choice. If she stopped working, she wouldn't be able to support the children. "I can help," Sterling said after the doctor left. "I can pay for a better health plan, buy nutritious food, hire someone to help with the house cleaning." "No," said Gladys firmly, "I don't accept charity." "It's not charity, it's responsibility." Sterling was determined. "I caused this situation. If your husband were alive, you wouldn't need to work so much." "I've always worked hard," said Gladys, "and I've always managed on my own. But now you have 2 children to care for, and you're working yourself to death. At least, let me help with the children. I can pay for a better school supplies, clothes. The children don't need an expensive school or designer clothes. They need love, attention, and good examples." Gladys's stubbornness frustrated Sterling, but at the same time made him admire her even more. She had a dignified pride that he respected, even when it complicated his plans to help. During the following weeks, Sterling began to visit her at home. Gladys's house was small but impeccably clean and organized. The children did their homework at the kitchen table, while she prepared dinner with simple but nutritious ingredients. Sterling realized that despite the financial difficulties, that house had something his mansion did not: human warmth. The children laughed, played, and helped each other. Gladys, even when tired, always had the patience to listen to her grandchildren's school stories. "Grandma," said Abigail one day, "why does Uncle Sterling always come here? Does he like us?" Gladys looked at Sterling, who was doing a puzzle with Arthur Caleb. "I think so, dear. I think he enjoys our company." And it was true. Sterling discovered those visits were the happiest moments of his week. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't constantly thinking about his disability or his problems. He was genuinely interested in the lives of those simple people who had managed to find joy despite their hardships. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, Gladys and Sterling stayed talking on the small porch of the house. "May I ask a personal question?" said Sterling. "Of course. Are you sure you've forgiven me? Because sometimes I feel you're just trying to be polite." Gladys was silent for a long time, looking at the stars. "At first I really was pretending," she finally admitted. "I thought if I could convince you I had forgiven you, maybe you would feel better and I could also move on." Sterling felt his stomach tighten. "And now?" he asked, afraid of the answer. "Now I see you playing with my grandchildren. I see how you worry about us. I see the genuine pain in your eyes. I realized you are not a monster who killed my husband out of malice. You're just an imperfect man who made a terrible mistake on a terrible night. That doesn't bring your husband back. No, it doesn't. But holding hatred for you won't bring him back either. And besides," she smiled slightly, "Arthur always said life is too short to hold grudges." Sterling felt a mix of relief and sadness. Gladys's forgiveness was real, but it didn't lessen the weight of his guilt. "How do I live with this?" asked Sterling. "How do I move forward knowing I destroyed your family?" "The same way I move forward knowing I lost my husband," said Gladys. "One day at a time, trying to do something good with the time we have left." That night, Sterling had his first peaceful dream in 2 years. He didn't dream of the accident, didn't wake up in a cold sweat. He dreamed of the children laughing and of Gladys's serene smile. The next morning, Sterling made a decision that would change everything. Sterling called his lawyer and asked him to set up a legal structure to help Gladys's family without her immediately noticing. He would pay the electricity, water, and phone bills directly to the companies. He would deposit money into the children's school account for supplies and uniforms. He would even pay the house rent through a supposed municipal social services program. "Mr. Sterling," said the lawyer, concerned, "this could lead to legal problems. If the family discovers you're behind all this, they could sue for manipulation or coercion." "I don't care," replied Sterling. "Just make it happen." Over the following months, Gladys began to notice some strange coincidences. The electricity bill came with a low-income family discount. The children's school offered full scholarships for academic merit. The landlord said City Hall was paying part of the rent through a new social program. Gladys was too smart not to be suspicious, but she decided not to investigate too deeply. The children were happy, she was less financially stressed, and it gave her more time and energy to dedicate to them. Sterling continued his regular visits, but now he could see a real difference in the family's quality of life. Gladys no longer came home too exhausted to play with her grandchildren. The children had proper school supplies and new clothes. The refrigerator was always stocked with nutritious food. One afternoon, while helping Arthur Caleb with his math homework, Sterling noticed the boy was using a new, expensive notebook. "Nice notebook," commented Sterling. "The school gave it for free," said Arthur Caleb excitedly. "They said I'm a very good student." Sterling looked at Gladys, who was watching from the kitchen. She just smiled and continued preparing the children's snack. After a few more months of these coincidences, Gladys finally confronted Sterling. "Do you think I'm foolish?" she asked one day when they were alone on the porch. Sterling pretended not to understand. "What are you talking about?" "Your secret help, the electricity bill that magically got cheaper, the social program no one else in the East Side district knows about, the free uniforms only my grandchildren received." Sterling lowered his head, knowing he'd been found out. "Are you angry?" he asked. "I should be," said Gladys. "You're trying to buy a clear conscience." Sterling felt his heart race. He was prepared to hear that Gladys didn't want to see him anymore, that he had crossed an unacceptable line. "But I'm not," she continued, "because I know you're doing it for the right reason." "How so?" "You're not doing this to feel better. You're doing it because you genuinely care about us, and because Arthur would have wanted this for the children." Sterling felt his eyes fill with tears. "How can you be so understanding?" he asked. "Because I used to be a bitter and hateful person, and that almost destroyed me." Gladys took his hand. "Learning to forgive wasn't easy, Sterling. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it was also the thing that saved me." Gladys told him that in the first year after Arthur's loss, she had become a completely different person. She would yell at the children for any reason, was always in a bad mood at work, and spent nights awake planning ways to get revenge on Sterling. "I even hired a detective to investigate your life," she admitted. "I wanted to find some dirt I could use against you." Sterling was shocked. And did you find any? I found that you were a lonely man who worked himself to death to avoid thinking about the guilt you carried. I found that you had fired your driver on the day of the accident because you wanted to drive yourself in the rain. I found that you visited the accident site every week. Sterling didn't know these things about himself were being observed. The detective showed me pictures of you at the cemetery, leaving flowers on Arthur's grave, Gladys continued. That's when I realized you were suffering as much as I was. Sterling remembered the times he had gone to the cemetery, always at dawn so as not to be seen. He would leave simple flowers and stay there for hours, talking to the grave, apologizing. Why did you never tell me you knew about this? Asked Sterling. Because you needed to make that journey alone. You needed to reach the point of wanting to help us out of love, not guilt. Sterling realized Gladys had been much wiser than he imagined. She had allowed him to get close to the family, but at the same time was observing his true intentions. And now? What happens now? Asked Sterling. Now we keep being a family, Gladys said simply. The word family had a profound impact on Sterling. It had been so long since he felt part of a family that he had forgotten how good it felt to belong somewhere. In the months that followed, Sterling became a constant presence in the lives of Gladys and the children. He helped with homework, took everyone out on weekend trips, and gradually became the father figure Abigail and Arthur Caleb no longer had. The children began calling him Uncle Sterling, a title he carried with immense pride. For the first time since the accident, Sterling felt his life had purpose again. One night after putting the children to bed, Sterling and Gladys were talking in the living room when she made an observation that surprised him. "Did you know your legs have been less tense lately?" she said. Sterling looked at his legs. It was true. In recent months he had noticed fewer muscle spasms and more sensitivity in some areas. "My physical therapist said that's normal. Sometimes muscles relax over time," replied Sterling, not giving it much importance. "Or maybe it's because you're finally relaxing on the inside," suggested Gladys. Sterling hadn't thought of that. Since he started visiting that family, his physical therapy sessions had become less painful. He was sleeping better, eating with more appetite, and even smiling more often. "Do you think there's a connection?" asked Sterling. "I think the body and soul are more connected than we imagine," said Gladys. "When we are at peace inside, the body calms down too." Sterling began paying more attention to the signals from his own body. It was true that he had been feeling physically better since his mental health had improved. His doctors had commented on the progress, but he always attributed it to conventional treatments. One morning, while doing his physical therapy exercises at home, Sterling had a strange sensation. For a brief moment, he felt a different tingling in his right leg. It wasn't the kind of phantom sensation he sometimes felt, but something more real and defined. He tried to move his foot and, to his absolute surprise, managed an almost imperceptible movement. Sterling was stunned, unable to believe what had just happened. He immediately called his doctor, who asked him to go to the hospital immediately for tests. The results showed a slight improvement in neural response, something the specialists couldn't fully explain. "It's unusual," said the doctor, "but not impossible. Sometimes the nervous system finds new pathways to communicate. It could be the result of your consistent physical therapy or an improvement in your overall health." Sterling didn't tell the doctor about Gladys and her theory that emotional healing could influence physical healing. He himself wasn't sure if he completely believed it, but when he arrived at Gladys's house that afternoon, he shared the news with her. "I knew," she said simply, with a smile that showed no surprise. "How did you know?" "Because you're not the same person I met a year ago. You found peace, you found purpose, you found love. When the soul heals, the body follows." Sterling was still skeptical, but he couldn't deny the facts. His legs were definitely responding better to stimuli, and he was feeling stronger and more energetic than he had in years. In the following weeks, the physical progress continued slowly but consistently. Sterling managed to stand with support for a few seconds. His muscles began to respond better to exercises, and he even managed to take a few staggering steps with the help of a walker. His medical team was intrigued but optimistic. They began adjusting his treatments to take advantage of this unexpected improvement. Sterling was more motivated than ever to do physical therapy, because now he had a real reason to want to walk again. "I want to be able to walk down the aisle when Abigail gets married," Sterling told Gladys one day. "That's still about 10 years away," laughed Gladys. "Then I have 10 years to prepare," Sterling replied with determination. Sterling's physical improvement coincided with changes in other areas of his life as well. He began to become more actively involved in his businesses, but now with a different focus. Instead of just seeking profit, he began looking for ways for his companies to contribute positively to the community. Sterling implemented scholarship programs for employees' children, created an emergency medical assistance fund, and began hiring people with disabilities and former inmates, giving opportunities to those who would normally be rejected by the job market. Gladys became his unofficial advisor for these social projects. Her life experience and practical wisdom helped Sterling understand the real needs of the people he wanted to help. "It's no use giving money if you don't truly understand the problem," Gladys would say whenever Sterling proposed some overly simplistic solution. She took him to meet other families in the East Side district, to talk to the unemployed, to visit underfunded public schools. Sterling discovered a world that existed just a few miles from his mansion, but one he had never truly seen before. This experience completely changed his perspective on social responsibility and his role as a businessman in the community. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. During a visit to a public school in Gladys's neighborhood, Sterling met the principal, Principal Margaret, an energetic 55-year-old woman who struggled to keep the school running with minimal resources. "Mr. Sterling," said Principal Margaret, after showing him the inadequate facilities, "I'm not asking for donations, I'm asking for a partnership. These children have potential, they just need opportunities." Sterling was impressed by the principal's direct approach. She wasn't begging for help. She was proposing a collaboration that would benefit both parties. "What do you have in mind?" asked Sterling. "Paid internships for high school students at your companies, vocational technical courses in the evening, and perhaps, if the results are good, university scholarships for the top students." The proposal was ambitious, but Sterling saw the potential immediately. It wasn't just charity, it was an investment in human capital. The young people would have real opportunities for growth, and his companies would have access to motivated and grateful employees. Sterling implemented the pilot project with 20 students. Gladys suggested that Abigail and Arthur Caleb participate as well, even though they were still very young, as a way to inspire them and show them possibilities for the future. The project was a success from the start. The young people proved to be dedicated and eager to learn. Sterling discovered that many of them had innovative ideas and fresh perspectives that benefited his companies in unexpected ways. "See how helping others helps us too," said Gladys when Sterling told her about the project's first results. "You always knew it would work," replied Sterling. "Not always, but I trusted that you would make it work." Gladys's trust in Sterling was something he was still learning to accept. Throughout his life, he had strived to prove his worth through financial achievements and power. Now, he was discovering a different kind of validation, based on genuine human relationships and positive social impact. His physical progress also continued. Sterling could now walk short distances with the aid of canes, and his doctors were optimistic about the possibility of even greater recovery over time. "How do you explain this to your doctors?" asked Gladys one day, as Sterling walked across the room with difficulty, but walked nonetheless. "I tell them it's the result of intensive physical therapy and an improvement in my overall health," replied Sterling, focused on each step. "And they believe that? They accept it because they don't have a better explanation." Sterling stopped to rest. "But I know the truth. I know I started to get better when I met you." "I didn't heal you, Sterling. You allowed yourself to be healed." Sterling reflected on that observation. Gladys was right. Her healing hadn't been through magical prayers or supernatural powers. It had been through forgiveness, acceptance, purpose, and love. She had offered those things, but he had made the choice to accept them. One Sunday morning, Sterling was playing with the children in Gladys's small backyard when something extraordinary happened. Arthur Caleb was running after a ball that had gotten away, about to fall into a small ditch beside the house. By instinct, Sterling rose from his chair and ran after the boy. He didn't think, he didn't plan, he just acted. He managed to catch Arthur Caleb in time, and only then did he realize he had run. He had truly run a few steps, without canes, without support, moved only by the urgent need to protect the child. Gladys witnessed it all from the kitchen window. When Sterling realized what he had done, she was there, with tears in her eyes and a radiant smile on her face. "See," she said simply, "when you have a purpose greater than yourself, the impossible becomes possible." The children didn't even realize the importance of the moment. To them, it was natural that Uncle Sterling would protect Arthur Caleb. But for Sterling, those few running steps represented the moment he fully understood the nature of the healing Gladys had offered. It wasn't a miraculous physical cure. It was a healing of the spirit that allowed the body to find its own ways to recover. It was a healing through purpose, love, responsibility, and genuine human connection. That night, Sterling called his doctors to tell them about the episode. They asked him to go to the hospital immediately for new tests. The results showed his neural recovery had accelerated significantly. "This is extraordinary," said the neurologist. "I can't scientifically explain what's happening, but you are definitely recovering functions we considered permanently lost." Sterling knew science had no explanation for his recovery because science didn't measure things like forgiveness, purpose, and love. But he had personally experienced the power of these forces. In the following months, Sterling continued to improve physically, but more importantly, he continued to grow emotionally and spiritually. He completely transformed his companies, creating a business model that balanced profit with social responsibility. Gladys accepted an honorary advisory role in his companies, where her practical wisdom helped guide decisions affecting employees and the community. She had never worked in an office before, but her emotional intelligence and deep understanding of the needs of ordinary people made her a valuable consultant. Who would have thought a hospital janitor would become a business advisor? Sterling laughed one day. Who would have thought an arrogant millionaire would become a decent person? Gladys retorted affectionately. The friendship between them had transformed into something that transcended the circumstances that brought them together. They became chosen family, united not by blood, but by a shared journey of pain, forgiveness, and growth. Sterling began accompanying Gladys to her morning prayers at the small neighborhood church. Initially skeptical of organized religion, he gradually found peace in moments of silence and reflection. He didn't become religious in the traditional sense, but developed his own spirituality based on gratitude and service to others. "Are you praying for anything specific today?" Gladys asked one Sunday after the service. "I'm giving thanks," Sterling replied. "Giving thanks that you insisted on offering me that healing when I laughed in your face. And I'm giving thanks that you were stubborn enough to keep showing up in my life even when I didn't want you there." The two laughed, remembering the difficult early encounters and how different they both were now. Abigail and Arthur Caleb grew up seeing Sterling as a natural part of their lives. To them, he had always been the uncle who helped with homework, who took them out on weekends, and who was always present for important moments. When Abigail turned 15, Sterling organized a birthday party at the company, inviting all the employees and their families. Seeing the shy girl he had met transform into a confident, intelligent young woman was one of the greatest joys of his life. "Uncle Sterling," Abigail said during the party, "when I grow up, I want to work at your company and help other kids like you helped us." Sterling felt his eyes fill with tears. The cycle of generosity was perpetuating itself. Abigail had learned, through example, that true fulfillment comes from helping others. "You're going to be better than me," Sterling replied, "because you learned from a young age what I only discovered when I was already old." Arthur Caleb Miller, now 12 years old, showed exceptional talent in mathematics and science. Sterling was already planning his educational options, ensuring the boy had every opportunity his grandfather Arthur never had. In a private conversation with Gladys, Sterling expressed his desire to formalize his relationship with the children. "I would like to adopt them officially," said Sterling. "I know you are their grandmother and legal guardian, but I would like to be legally recognized as family too." Gladys was moved by the request. Are you sure this means lifelong responsibilities? I already have those responsibilities, replied Sterling. I just want it to be official. I want them to know they can always count on me, even after you're no longer here. The adoption process was complex, but Sterling had learned to be patient. During the months of legal proceedings, he continued to be the father the children never had, and they continued to be the children he never knew he wanted. When the adoption was finalized, Sterling organized a small ceremony at Gladys's house. Nothing elaborate, just family and close friends. The judge presiding over the ceremony remarked he had never seen an adoption process with so much genuine love involved. Today we make official what has been a reality for a long time, said the judge. This family chose and built itself through love, not chance. Sterling, who now walked with only a light cane, stood throughout the entire ceremony. His legs were steady, his smile radiant, and his heart was full. That night, after everyone had left, Sterling and Gladys stayed talking on the porch, as they had done so many times before. "Do you remember when you said you could heal me with a prayer?" asked Sterling. "I do." "You were right. Not in the way I thought you meant, but you were right." "Prayer works in mysterious ways," smiled Gladys. "Sometimes the healing we ask for is not the healing we receive, but it is always the healing we need." Sterling reflected on that. He had thought he needed to be healed of his paralysis, but in truth, he needed to be healed of his bitterness, his loneliness, his selfishness, and his guilt. The physical recovery had been an unexpected bonus. "And you?" asked Sterling. "Were you healed too?" "I was," replied Gladys without hesitation. "I was healed of anger, resentment, hopelessness. Arthur taught me to love, but you taught me to forgive, and forgiving was the greatest healing I could receive." The two sat in comfortable silence watching the stars, two people who had met in the worst possible situation and had built something beautiful and lasting together. 5 years after the adoption, Sterling was at the hospital not as a patient but as a visitor. Gladys had been admitted for gallbladder surgery, a simple procedure, but one that worried everyone due to her age. Sterling spent the entire night at the hospital, sharing the vigil with Abigail and Arthur Caleb Miller, who were now responsible and caring teenagers. When Gladys woke from the anesthesia, the first thing she saw was the family gathered around her bed. "I thought I had died and gone to heaven," she joked, still drowsy. "It must be heaven because there are angels around my bed." "Don't be dramatic," laughed Sterling. "You're too strong to die from a simple surgery. You still have many prayers to say and many people to heal." "I've already done my main healing," said Gladys, looking at Sterling affectionately. "I turned a bitter millionaire into a loving father. I think I can retire." Sterling held Gladys's hand, feeling the strength and serenity that always emanated from her. "You will never retire," he said. "You will continue to be our counselor, our guide, our conscience. We need you." "And I need you," replied Gladys. "You gave me a family when I thought I had lost everything." Abigail and Arthur Caleb moved closer to the bed, each taking one of their grandmother's hands. "Grandma," said Abigail, "when you get out of the hospital, we're going to take that trip you always wanted." "What trip?" asked Gladys, confused. "To the town where you and Grandpa Arthur met. Uncle Sterling has already arranged everything. We're going to see the places from your youth." Gladys began to cry, but they were tears of joy. The idea of revisiting the happy memories with Arthur, now accompanied by her new family, moved her deeply. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "We didn't do it out of obligation," said Sterling. "We did it out of love. Just as you offered me healing out of love, not obligation." Gladys's surgery was a complete success, and a few weeks later, the whole family was taking the promised trip. Sterling drove the entire way, something he hadn't done since before the accident. His legs were fully functional, though he still used a cane on days when he was tired. In the town where Arthur and Gladys had met, they visited the square where they had their first date, the church where they got married, and the little house where they lived the first years of their marriage. "Arthur would be so happy to see our family," said Gladys as they walked through the main square. "Wouldn't he be jealous of me taking his place?" asked Sterling, half joking, half serious. "You didn't take his place," Gladys replied firmly. "You created your own place. Arthur was my husband and the children's grandfather. You are our friend, our protector, our chosen brother. They are different roles, but both important. During that trip, Sterling fully understood that his family had been formed in an unconventional way, but no less legitimate for it. They were not bound by blood or marriage, but by choice, forgiveness, gratitude, and unconditional love. On the last day of the trip, they visited Arthur's grave. Sterling had been there many times alone, but never with the family. Gladys placed fresh flowers on the grave and said a simple prayer. "Arthur," she said aloud, "I've brought our family to meet you. The children are growing up well, and Sterling has become the man you always believed he could be." Sterling stepped closer to the grave and also spoke. "Arthur, I know you can't answer me, but I need to say this. I'm sorry for the accident. I'm sorry for taking you from your family, but I promise I will look after them forever, just as you would if you were here." Abigail and Arthur Caleb also spoke to their grandfather, telling him about school, friends, and dreams for the future. It was a surreal moment, but also deeply cathartic for everyone. When they returned home, everyone felt that an important cycle had closed. The past had been honored, the present was being lived fully, and the future seemed promising. Sterling continued expanding his social programs, always with Gladys's guidance. They created an official foundation that offered scholarships, medical assistance, and job opportunities for families in vulnerable situations. The foundation was named the Arthur Miller Institute, a way to honor the memory of the man who, involuntarily, had been the catalyst for the transformation of all their lives. At the official inauguration of the institute, Sterling gave a speech that moved everyone present. "This institute was born from a tragedy," he said, "but it grew through forgiveness, love, and hope. Arthur Miller died in a terrible accident, but his memory lives on through every life we can transform through this work." Gladys was in the front row, tears of pride in her eyes. Beside her, Abigail and Arthur Caleb Miller applauded enthusiastically. The family born from pain had become a source of healing for many other families. Years passed, and the story of Sterling and Gladys became legend in the town. People spoke of the millionaire who had learned to walk again through forgiveness, and of the custodian who had healed hearts with her silent prayers. Abigail graduated in psychology and began working at the institute, helping other families overcome trauma and rebuild their lives. Arthur Caleb pursued a career in engineering, but always made time for the family's social projects. Sterling, now with graying hair but still active and energetic, continued to run his businesses with social responsibility. Gladys, at 75, had officially retired from the hospital, but remained the spiritual counselor for the entire extended family they had created. On a quiet afternoon, as they watched Gladys's grandchildren, Abigail's children, playing in the garden, Sterling made an observation that summed up his entire journey. "Do you know what the greatest miracle of all this was?" he said. "What?" asked Gladys, curious. "It wasn't me walking again. It was learning to truly live." Gladys smiled, that serene smile that had become the trademark of her wisdom. "That wasn't a miracle," she said. "It was a choice. You chose to accept forgiveness, you chose to love, you chose to serve others. Miracles happen when we make the right choices." Sterling reflected on that. All these years, he had wondered if Gladys's healing had been supernatural or scientific. Now he understood that distinction didn't matter. What mattered was that she had offered healing, and he had chosen to accept it. "If someone asked you how to heal a broken heart," said Sterling, "what would you say?" "The same thing I told you on the first day," said Gladys without hesitation. "I would say I can heal you with a prayer, because prayer isn't just asking God for things. Prayer is opening your heart to love, to forgiveness, to hope." "And if the person laughed in your face like I did?" "I would wait," replied Gladys with infinite patience. "I would wait until they were ready to accept the healing that is already available, because healing is always available. We just need to choose to receive it." In that moment, Sterling understood he had become himself a healer. Through the institute, the socially responsible businesses, the unconditional love for the family he had adopted, he was offering healing to others in the same way Gladys had offered it to him. The cycle perpetuated itself. Healed people healed other people, Transformed hearts transformed other hearts. Love multiplied love. As the sun began to set on that special day, Sterling stood up without a cane and extended his hand to Gladys. "Shall we go in?" he said. "The children will want dinner soon." Gladys accepted the outstretched hand and rose slowly. Together they walked toward the house, where the laughter of the grandchildren echoed through the open windows. "Sterling," said Gladys as they neared the door, "you know I love you like a son, don't you?" "And you know I love you like the mother I chose to have," replied Sterling, moved. "Then we're even," smiled Gladys. "I offered you healing and you gave me a new family." They entered the house together, two survivors of a tragedy who had chosen to transform their pain into love, their guilt into responsibility, and their loss into gain for many others. Gladys's prayer had been answered in a way neither of them had expected at the beginning. Sterling had been healed, not just physically but spiritually, and in the process, an entire family had been healed, and through them, hundreds of other families also found hope and transformation. Years later, when Sterling was preparing to turn 90, he decided to write his memoirs. The book would become a national bestseller, inspiring thousands of people to seek forgiveness, reconciliation, and purpose in their own lives. The title of the book was "The Woman Who Healed Me with a Prayer." In the dedication, Sterling wrote, "For Gladys, who taught me that the greatest prayer is to live a life of love. For Arthur, whose involuntary sacrifice made possible a transformation he could never have imagined. For Abigail and Arthur Caleb, who taught me that family is created with the heart, not with blood. And for all those still waiting for a miracle, the miracle is already available, ready. You just have to choose to accept it." On the last page of the book, Sterling included a photo of the whole family gathered in the garden of Gladys's house. He was standing, without a cane, with his arm around Gladys's shoulders. Abigail and Arthur Caleb were beside them, now adults with their own families. It was a picture of genuine and complete happiness. Below the photo, a single sentence: "Some prayers are answered in ways only the heart can understand." Sterling's book became a source of inspiration for people all over the world. Gladys, who was initially reluctant to have her story told publicly, ended up receiving thousands of letters from readers who found hope in her journey of forgiveness. "See," said Sterling when the first pile of letters arrived, "your healing didn't stop with me. It's spreading to people we don't even know." "That's frightening," admitted Gladys. "I'm just a simple woman who learned to forgive. I'm not a saint or a teacher." "You are exactly what you need to be," replied Sterling. "You are authentic, and that is more powerful than any degree or title." Gladys began to personally respond to some of the letters that touched her most. Her simple, direct wisdom helped many people find their own path to forgiveness and healing. One of the letters that moved her most came from a woman from the countryside who had lost her son in a traffic accident caused by a drunk driver. "Mrs. Gladys," the woman wrote, "I read your story and cried for hours. It's been 3 years since my son died, and I have been living only to hate the man who killed him. But your story showed me that this is killing me inside. I want to learn to forgive, but I don't know how to start. Can you help me?" Gladys replied with a long and caring letter, sharing details of her own journey that had not been included in the book. She explained that forgiveness was not a single event, but a daily process of choosing to release anger. "Forgiveness," she wrote, "doesn't mean forgetting what happened or saying it was right. It means choosing not to let the hurt control your life. It's freeing your heart so you can love again." The correspondence between the two women continued for months, and gradually the grieving mother began her own journey of healing. Eventually, she even wrote a letter to the driver who had killed her son, not to absolve him, but to free herself from the prison of hatred. Sterling watched Gladys conduct this correspondence with growing admiration. She had become, without realizing it, a spiritual counselor for people across the country. "You should write your own book," Sterling suggested one day. "I'm not a writer," replied Gladys. "I'm just a woman who learned some hard lessons." "Exactly. That's why people trust you. You speak the language of the heart, not the head." Eventually, Sterling convinced Gladys to record her reflections on forgiveness, family, and spiritual healing. The resulting book, Prayers of the Heart, became even more popular than Sterling's, especially among women who had faced significant losses. Gladys's simple wisdom touched hearts across the country. Phrases like, "Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself," and "Family is where you find unconditional love, not necessarily where you are born," became mantras for thousands of readers. The success of the books brought unexpected fame to both, but they used this platform to further amplify the work of the Arthur Miller Institute. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing them to expand their programs to other cities. Sterling created a specific program for traffic accident victims and their families, offering psychological support, temporary financial assistance, and mediation between the parties involved when appropriate. "We imagine how many other families could benefit if the victims and the responsible parties talked like we did," said Sterling during the program's launch. The Healing Through Dialogue program became a national model for restorative justice. Instead of focusing solely on punishment, the program facilitated structured conversations between victims and responsible parties when both sides were willing. Not every case resulted in reconciliation like Sterling and Gladys's, but many found some level of healing and closure through honest dialogue. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. Abigail, now a licensed psychologist, specialized in family therapy and became the program's coordinator. Her own experience of growing up in a family formed by tragedy and transformed by love made her especially effective in helping other families. "Aunt Gladys," Abigail said one day. She always called Gladys Aunt, despite her technically being her grandmother. "I want you to know that our family taught me that love is stronger than any tragedy." "And what will you do with that lesson?" asked Gladys, always focused on how life lessons could be applied to help others. "I will pass it on. To every family I counsel, to every person who is lost in pain, I will show that it is possible to rebuild, that it is possible to find joy again." Arthur Caleb, now an engineer, developed assistive technologies for people with physical disabilities. His inspiration came from Sterling's recovery journey and his own desire to help others with limited mobility. "Uncle Sterling," said Arthur Caleb during the launch of his first patent, "you showed me that a disability does not define a person, but you also taught me that technology can break down barriers and give more independence to those who need it." Sterling was proud of the two young people he had helped raise. They had absorbed not only love and security, but also the values of service and compassion that had characterized their unconventional family. At a special ceremony, Sterling and Gladys received an award from the city for their social contributions. The mayor declared the day Healing and Forgiveness Day, an annual date to celebrate the human capacity to transform tragedy into hope. During his acceptance speech, Sterling looked at the packed audience and saw hundreds of people whose lives had been touched in some way by the work they had developed. "When I met Mrs. Gladys," he said, "I was a man rich in money, but poor in spirit. She offered me the greatest wealth of all, the ability to love and be loved unconditionally." Gladys, at the microphone, was more direct as always. "I didn't heal Sterling," she said. "I just showed him that the healing was already within him. We all have that capacity for healing. We only need to choose to use it." After the ceremony, the family gathered at Gladys's house for an intimate celebration. It was a tradition they had developed. Whenever something important happened, they would gather in the small house where it all began. "You know what the most incredible part of this whole story is?" said Sterling, as he watched the 4 generations of the family gathered around the table. "What?" asked several voices at once. "It's that it's still being written. Every person who finds healing through our work, every family that rebuilds itself, every heart that learns to forgive, all of that is part of our story." Gladys, now 82 but still sharp and affectionate, smiled with that smile that had won Sterling over so many years before. "The best story never has an ending," she said, "because true love is eternal." That night, after everyone had left, Sterling helped Gladys tidy up the house. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, a moment of peace and intimacy at the end of special days. "Gladys," said Sterling as he dried the dishes, "I have a confession to make." "What?" she asked, curious. "On the first day you approached me, when you said you could heal me with a prayer, For a few seconds before I laughed. I wanted to believe you. I know, Gladys replied simply. How did you know? Because I saw it in your eyes. You were in so much pain that you were desperate for any hope, even if it came from a strange woman in worn-out clothes. Sterling stopped drying the dishes and looked at Gladys with renewed admiration. You always knew I would accept your help eventually? I hoped very much that you would, admitted Gladys, because I saw that you were a good person lost in grief, and good people deserve a second chance. And what if I had never changed, if I had remained arrogant and selfish? Gladys thought for a moment before answering. Then I would have kept praying for you all the same, because when you love someone, you don't give up. And I always knew that deep down, you were worthy of love. Sterling felt his eyes fill with tears. Even after all these years, Gladys's ability to see the good in people still amazed him. You saved my life, said Sterling. No, Gladys corrected gently. I offered healing. You saved your own life when you chose to accept it. They finished tidying the kitchen in a comfortable silence, two friends who had shared an extraordinary journey and who continued to find meaning in the simplicity of everyday moments. As Sterling was preparing to leave, Gladys stopped him at the door. Sterling, she said, you know I'm not going to live forever, right? The question caught Sterling off guard. They rarely spoke about mortality, preferring to focus on the present and the future. Why are you saying this? He asked, concerned. Because I want to be sure you will continue the work, even when I'm no longer here, that you will keep looking after the children, the Institute, all the people who have found hope through our story. Sterling held Gladys's hands, feeling the fragility of her bones, but also the strength of her spirit. I promise, he said firmly, but you'll still be here for many years. You still have many people to heal, many prayers to make. I hope so, smiled Gladys, but if I'm not, I want you to remember, the greatest prayer you can make is to live a life of love. Do that, and my prayer will be eternally answered. Sterling kissed Gladys's forehead, a gesture of affection that had become customary between them. I love you, mother of my heart, he said, using the affectionate nickname he had created for her. And I love you, my chosen son, she replied. Sterling left the house with a full heart, but also with a new awareness of the preciousness of time. Gladys was right. She would not live forever. But the legacy they had built together would continue touching lives for generations. In the years that followed, Sterling dedicated himself even more intensely to social work, as if wanting to ensure every moment was used to its fullest. The Arthur Miller Institute expanded to 5 states. Abigail Miller opened her own family therapy clinic, and Arthur Caleb Miller developed a complete line of affordable assistive equipment. Gladys continued to be the moral heart of the family, the person everyone sought when they needed advice or consolation. Her wisdom did not diminish with age. If anything, it seemed to deepen. One day at 85, Gladys had a minor stroke. Nothing serious, but enough to put the whole family on alert. During her recovery at the hospital, she received thousands of letters from people whose lives had been touched by her story. See how many people you've inspired, said Sterling, showing piles of correspondence. It wasn't me, insisted Gladys, even with her speech slightly slowed from the stroke. It was God's love working through us. Then God chose his instruments well, replied Sterling. Gladys's recovery was complete, but the scare served as a reminder to the whole family about the importance of cherishing every moment together. Sterling organized an 86th birthday party for Gladys that was simultaneously a celebration of life and a reunion of all those whose lives had been transformed by their work. Hundreds of people attended. Families who had found reconciliation through the Restorative Justice Program, young people who had received an education through the Institute's scholarships, people with disabilities who had found independence through the equipment developed by Arthur Caleb, and countless others who had found hope through the books and lectures. During the party, a woman approached Gladys with a small child in her arms. Mrs. Gladys, she said emotionally, this is my daughter Anna Gladys. I named her in your honor. Why? Asked Gladys, touched. Because when I was pregnant and my husband abandoned me, it was your story that gave me the strength to go on. You taught me that a family can be created with love, even in the most difficult circumstances. Gladys took the child in her arms and blessed her, as she did with all the babies she met. May she grow up knowing she is loved, said Gladys. And may she learn to spread that love wherever she goes. Sterling watched the scene from afar, marveling at the impact one simple woman with a great capacity for love had caused in the world. That night, after everyone had left, Sterling and Gladys sat on their favorite porch to talk. "It was a beautiful party," said Sterling. "Did you see how many lives you've touched?" "We touched," corrected Gladys. "This was always a team effort. But it started with you, with your courage to approach a stranger and offer healing." Gladys was thoughtful for a moment. "You know, Sterling, when I approached you that first day, I was desperate. It wasn't courage, it was desperation. I needed to find meaning in Arthur's death." "And did you?" "I did. The meaning was our family, our work, all the lives we managed to touch. Arthur did not die in vain if his death resulted in so much good for so many people." Sterling felt a lump in his throat. Even after all these years, it was still hard to talk about the accident and its consequences. "Do you think Arthur would approve of what we built?" he asked. "I'm sure," replied Gladys without hesitation. "Arthur always said his life would only have value if he could help other people. Through our family and our work, he is helping people every day." They fell silent, contemplating the stars and reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had shared. "Gladys," Sterling said finally, "I want you to know these have been the happiest years of my life." "Mine too," she replied. "Who would have thought two people brought together by a tragedy could find so much joy?" "I think it was precisely because of the tragedy," said Sterling. "It taught us the real value of things. It taught us not to waste time on pettiness or selfishness." "And it taught us that love is stronger than pain," added Gladys. The next morning, Sterling was awakened by an urgent call. Gladys had been found unconscious at home by Abigail, who had gone to visit her. The paramedics said she had suffered a more serious stroke during the night. Sterling rushed to the hospital, where he found Abigail and Arthur Caleb in a panic. The doctors were not optimistic. The stroke had been severe and Gladys was in a coma. For the next 3 days, the family took turns at Gladys's bedside. Sterling barely left the hospital, refusing to accept that the mother of his heart might be leaving. On the 3rd day, Gladys opened her eyes briefly. Sterling was the only one present in the room at that moment. "Sterling," she whispered with difficulty. "I'm here," he said, holding her hand. "You're going to be okay. The doctors said you will recover." Gladys smiled weakly. "Don't lie to me," she said. "I know it's time." Sterling began to cry. "It's not. You can't go. We still have so much work to do. The children still need you. I still need you." "You will all be fine," said Gladys with the serene certainty that had always characterized her. "You've learned everything I had to teach." "I haven't. I still have doubts. I still make mistakes. I still need your advice." "The answers are in your heart," said Gladys. "They always have been. I just helped you find them." Sterling knew he was losing the most important woman in his life, but he also knew he couldn't be selfish in her final moments. "Thank you," he said through his tears. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for teaching me how to truly live." "Thank you for giving me a new family," replied Gladys. "For giving meaning to Arthur's death. For teaching me that love can be born even from the worst circumstances." Gladys closed her eyes and squeezed Sterling's hand. "Take care of the children," she whispered. "Continue the work. Keep spreading love." "I promise," said Sterling. "And Sterling," Gladys opened her eyes one last time. "Remember that my prayer was answered. You were completely healed." Gladys died peacefully a few hours later, surrounded by the entire family she had helped to create and unite. Gladys Miller's funeral was an event that brought together thousands of people. Simple folks from the East Side district where she had lived mingled with business people transformed by her story, with families who had found healing through the Institute, with young people who had gotten an education through the social programs. Sterling gave the main eulogy, his voice choked with emotion. "Gladys Miller once told me she could heal me with a prayer," he said. I laughed at her. It was the most foolish thing I've ever done in my life. She truly did heal me with a prayer. Not a prayer of words, but a prayer of action. She prayed through forgiveness, love, patience, wisdom. She prayed through an entire life dedicated to healing broken hearts. Abigail also spoke, representing the younger generations of the family. "Grandma Gladys taught us that family isn't about blood, it's about choice," she said. "She chose to forgive when she could have hated, chose to love when she could have closed herself off, chose to build when she could have destroyed. Those choices created a family, and that family spread to touch thousands of other families." After the funeral, Sterling isolated himself for a few days, wrestling with a deep sadness. For the first time in years, he felt lost, without Gladys's moral guidance. It was Abigail who sought him out and drew him from his isolation. "Dad," she said. She had begun calling Sterling Dad after the official adoption. "Grandma Gladys made me promise something before she died." "What was it?" "She made me promise that I would look after you if you got lost in sadness over her." Sterling smiled through his tears. Typical of Gladys to think of taking care of everyone, even in her final moments. "What did she tell you to say to me?" asked Sterling. "She said, 'Tell Sterling that his prayer now is to live fully each day that remains. Tell him I'll be watching, and I'll be sad if he wastes time crying instead of continuing to spread love.'" Sterling laughed out loud for the first time since Gladys's death. Her practical wisdom continued to guide him even after her departure. "She's right," said Sterling. "As always. Let's get back to work." In the months that followed, Sterling channeled his grief into renewed dedication to the Institute. He created a special program to support the bereaved, helping people who, like him, were struggling to find meaning after losing a loved one. The Healing the Loss program became one of the Institute's most sought after. Sterling personally led support groups, sharing his own experience of loss and recovery. "The longing never goes away completely," he said during one of the sessions. "But you can choose whether to let it paralyze you or to transform it into fuel to do good things." 1 year after Gladys's death, Sterling launched his second book, Answered Prayers: How My Mother of My Heart Continues to Teach Me Even After Death. The book was a reflection on how Gladys's teachings continued to guide his life and work even after her departure. It became even more popular than the first, especially among people who had lost loved ones. During the book launch, a journalist asked a question that touched Sterling deeply. "Mr. Sterling, if Mrs. Gladys appeared here today and said again, 'I can heal you with a prayer,' what would you say?" Sterling thought for a long moment before answering. "I would say, 'Please, teach me how to do the same for others.'" He paused, visibly moved. "Because I've realized that the greatest healing we can receive is the ability to heal other people." The answer made national headlines and inspired even more people to seek out the Institute in search of ways to transform their own pain into tools of healing for others. Sterling had learned that the true continuity of Gladys's legacy was not in preserving her memory, but in multiplying her work. Every person who found healing through their work became a new agent of healing in the lives of others. The cycle perpetuated itself endlessly. Healed hearts healing other hearts, wounds transformed into wisdom, losses converted into gains for humanity. 2 years after Gladys's death, Sterling was walking through the cemetery when he saw an elderly woman kneeling by her husband's grave. She was weeping inconsolably, and something about the scene reminded Sterling of himself in the early years after the accident. Sterling approached slowly and asked gently, "Are you all right? Can I help with anything?" The woman looked at him with eyes swollen from crying. "No one can help me," she said. "I lost my husband 6 months ago and I can't find any reason to go on living." Sterling felt a wave of familiar compassion. He had been in that exact emotional place so many times. "I know how you feel," he said softly. "May I sit here with you for a moment?" The woman nodded, and Sterling sat on the grass beside her. "What was his name?" asked Sterling. "Clifford," she replied. "We were married for 52 years. It must have been a very beautiful marriage. He was the best man in the world. We never fought. We never spent a single day apart. I don't know how to live without him." Sterling listened patiently as the woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor, told him about the life she had built with Clifford. It was a story of simple, genuine love, not unlike the story Gladys had shared about Arthur. "Mrs. Eleanor," Sterling finally said. "May I tell you a story?" She nodded, curious. Sterling told her about Gladys, about how they met, about how she had transformed her personal tragedy into a life mission to help others. He spoke about how true love doesn't end with death, but finds new ways to express itself. "Do you think Clifford would want to see you suffering so much?" Sterling asked gently. "No," admitted Mrs. Eleanor. "He always said I was too strong to let anything defeat me." "Then perhaps he's waiting for you to find a way to honor his memory by continuing to live a full life." Mrs. Eleanor was silent for a long time, absorbing Sterling's words. "How do I do that?" she finally asked. "How do I find the strength to go on?" Sterling felt the echo of Gladys's words coming from his own mouth. "Let me help," he said, "not with miracles or empty promises, but with companionship, with understanding, with the experience of someone who has already been where you are." "Why would a stranger care about me?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, suspicious. "Because once a stranger cared about me when I needed it most," Sterling replied. "And because I've found that helping other people is the best way to honor those we have loved and lost." Mrs. Eleanor accepted Sterling's help. In the following months, she became a volunteer at the Institute, helping other grieving people find reasons to keep living. Her experience of 52 years of happy marriage became a source of inspiration for couples facing difficulties. Sterling realized he had become what Gladys had been for him, an agent of healing, someone who transformed his own pain into wisdom to help others. The Institute continued to grow, but Sterling always made sure to maintain the simple, direct essence that Gladys had brought to the work. It wasn't about complex psychology or elaborate theories. It was about people caring for people, hearts caring for hearts. On his 95th birthday, Sterling was surrounded by a family that included not only Abigail and Arthur Caleb and their children, but also hundreds of people who had been touched by the work he and Gladys had built together. During his thank you speech, Sterling made a revelation that surprised everyone. 30 years ago, he said, a woman approached me and said, "I can heal you with a prayer." I laughed at her. Today, at 95, I can say she kept her promise. She healed me completely. Sterling paused, visibly moved. But the healing she gave me wasn't just for me. It was a healing that could be multiplied infinitely. Every person who finds hope through our work is proof that Gladys's prayer continues to be answered every day. The audience fell completely silent, absorbing the depth of those words. "That is why," Sterling continued, "my greatest wish is that each of you also becomes an instrument of healing. May you carry to your families, your work, your communities, the same love that transformed my life." That night, after everyone had left, Sterling was alone in his house when he felt Gladys's presence in an almost tangible way. It was nothing supernatural, just the comforting feeling that their joint work continued, that the love they had planted would keep growing for generations. Sterling opened his drawer and took out the first letter Gladys had written to him years ago, when she was still a stranger who knew impossible details about his life. He reread the words written in a shaky hand. "I know you remember the accident on County Road 42 near the Blue Ridge gas station on that rainy March day. My husband was in the other car." Now, so many years later, Sterling fully understood that letter had not just been about the accident. It had been about possibilities, about what two people willing to open themselves to love could build together. Sterling took a sheet of paper and began writing his own letter, not to Gladys, but to future generations of the family they had created. "To those who come after us, you are the fruit of an answered prayer. You exist because two people chose love over hatred, forgiveness over revenge, building over destruction. Carry this inheritance with pride, but remember it comes with responsibility. You are instruments of healing. Use this gift wisely." Sterling folded the letter and stored it with other important family documents. He knew that one day, when he was no longer there, someone would find those words and understand the weight of the inheritance they had received. In his final years, Sterling dedicated himself to documenting everything about the work he and Gladys had developed. He created a complete archive with stories of people who had been helped, methodologies that had worked, lessons they had learned. "I don't want anything to be lost," he explained to Abigail when she asked about all that documentation. I want future generations to be able to continue and improve what we started. Sterling died peacefully at 97, surrounded by Abigail, Arthur Caleb, and the great-grandchildren he had helped raise. His last words were, "Tell Gladys I kept my promise." Sterling's funeral was even larger than Gladys's. People from all over the country traveled to pay their last respects to the man who had dedicated the last 30 years of his life to transforming pain into healing. Abigail gave the main speech, with the strong, clear voice she had inherited from her mother of my heart. "Dad Sterling taught us that miracles exist," she said, "but not in the way we imagine. The miracle is not in supernatural events, but in the human capacity to transform tragedy into hope, hatred into love, loss into gain for all humanity." The Arthur Miller Institute continued operating under the leadership of Abigail and Arthur Caleb, but now with an expanded name, the Arthur Miller Institute, the Sterling and Gladys Foundation for Healing and Reconciliation. The story of Sterling and Gladys became a national legend, told and retold in schools, churches, and community centers. But more important than the legend were the practical fruits of their work. Thousands of families reconciled, hundreds of young people educated, countless hearts healed. 10 years after Sterling's death, Abigail was organizing his papers when she found a sealed envelope with the following instruction, "To be opened only when I am no longer here." Inside the envelope was a final letter from Sterling. "To my dear daughter Abigail, and to all our chosen family, if you are reading this, it means I have completed my earthly journey. Do not be sad. I lived a full and complete life, far beyond what I deserved or expected. When I met Gladys, I was dead inside even though my body still breathed. She brought me back to life through a prayer that lasted 30 years. A prayer of action, of love, of unconditional forgiveness. Now it's with you. You are the continuation of that prayer. Every life you touch, every heart you heal, every family you reconcile will be a new verse of this infinite prayer. Do not cling to the past, not even to our past. What Gladys and I built was just the beginning. You will take this to places we cannot even imagine. Remember, when someone is in despair, when someone is lost in pain, when someone thinks there is no hope, you can say, "I can help you." And if the person laughs, as I laughed at Gladys, be patient. Healing will come when they are ready to receive it. Love never dies. It just finds new ways to express itself through new people. Be those people. With eternal love, Sterling Harrison, the man who was healed by a prayer. Abigail read the letter aloud to the whole gathered family. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. "So?" asked Arthur Caleb after a long silence. "Are you ready to continue the prayer?" Everyone answered yes in unison, their voices echoing through the house where it had all begun, where Gladys had prepared her first meals for that unlikely family, where Sterling had first learned what it meant to belong somewhere. The house became a living memorial, a training center for volunteers who wanted to learn the reconciliation methodologies developed by Sterling and Gladys. But more than methodologies, the volunteers learned the fundamental philosophy that had guided everything: unconditional love, practical forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves a second chance. The story continued, passed down from generation to generation, not as a static legend, but as a living force that kept transforming lives. Because in the end, that had always been the true nature of Gladys's prayer. Not a single request to God, but an eternal commitment to serve as an instrument of his healing on earth. And so, the prayer that began with an elderly woman in worn-out clothes approaching a millionaire in a wheelchair perpetuated itself through generations, touching millions of lives, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as simple gestures of human love. The last sentence of the last book written about Sterling and Gladys's story perfectly summarized the legacy they left. They taught us that there are no strangers, only family we haven't met yet, and that the greatest prayer we can make is to live in such a way that our existence is a blessing in the lives of others. End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe forgiveness can truly heal broken hearts? What kind of prayer would you make for someone who hurt you? Leave your honest opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories.